duck. It was supposed to be a blind date with a boring tax accountant named Arthur. Celeste expected a night of awkward silence and discussions about spreadsheet macros. Instead, she found herself pressed against the cold alley pavement while the mild-mannered man in the beige sweater vest dismantled 5 heavily armed men in under 10 seconds. He didn't just survive. He moved like a seasoned predator. Arthur adjusted his glasses, stepped over an unconscious body, and sighed. "Check, please." Raindrops lashed against the window of the Uber as Celeste Sanders watched the neon signs of Manhattan blur into long, distorted streaks of color. She checked her reflection in the darkened glass, adjusting a stray curl of auburn hair that had escaped her careful styling. She wore a simple charcoal slip dress, elegant but understated, exactly the right armor for what she anticipated would be an aggressively mediocre evening. Her best friend, Jessica, had been relentless. "He's a CPA, Celeste, certified public accountant. He works for a very prestigious firm in Midtown. Yes, he's a little quiet, and maybe he wears sensible shoes. But after the absolute circus of toxic musicians and finance bros you've been dealing with, sensible is exactly what you need. His name is Arthur. He owns property. He probably has a fantastic credit score." Celeste had finally surrendered, exhausted by Jessica's campaign and secretly longing for a night without emotional whiplash. She just wanted a normal conversation with a normal man who didn't communicate entirely in vague text messages. The car pulled up to Osteria Morini, a rustic but high-end Italian establishment in Soho. Celeste stepped out, her heels clicking against the damp pavement, and rushed under the awning. The maitre d' took her wet trench coat with a practiced smile. "I'm looking for an Arthur," Celeste asked, scanning the dimly lit dining room filled with the rich scents of garlic, truffle and aged parmesan. "Ah, yes. Mr. Pendleton, right this way." The host led her to a secluded corner booth. Sitting there was a man who looked exactly like the human equivalent of a dial tone. Arthur wore a beige V-neck sweater over a crisp white button-down, complete with a subtly patterned tie. His dark hair was parted neatly to one side, perhaps a bit too rigid with product, and a pair of thick, dark-rimmed glasses obscured a significant portion of his face. When he saw her approach, he stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his water glass in his haste. "Celeste? Hi. Hello. I'm Arthur," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, surprisingly rough at the calluses, but his demeanor was entirely apologetic. "Thank you for coming. I know the weather is awful." "It's nice to meet you, Arthur," Celeste said, sliding into the leather booth. The first 45 minutes of the date went exactly as she had feared. Arthur was polite to a fault, asking perfectly acceptable, thoroughly rehearsed questions about her job in architectural design. But whenever the conversation turned to him, he defaulted to his profession. "The trick with Section 179 deductions," Arthur explained, meticulously cutting his chicken parmesan into perfectly even squares, "is that you have to place the equipment into service in the same tax year you purchase it. A lot of clients think they can just buy a fleet of vehicles in December, leave them on the lot and write them off. The IRS is very strict about the placed-in-service rule." "Fascinating," Celeste murmured, taking a long, necessary sip of her Chianti. She studied him over the rim of her glass. There was something odd about Arthur. Despite his dull subject matter, he didn't slouch. He sat with perfect, rigid posture, his shoulders squared. His eyes, framed by those thick glasses, were a striking, piercing hazel, and they rarely settled on her face for long. Instead, he seemed to be constantly scanning the restaurant, noting the waiters, checking the exits, tracking the movement of a boisterous party near the bar. "I'm sorry," Arthur said suddenly, halting his fork midway to his mouth. "I'm boring you. Jessica warned me I have a habit of talking about work when I get nervous. Celeste felt a sudden pang of guilt. No, you're not boring me. I just don't know much about taxes. What do you do for fun, Arthur? When you aren't saving people from the IRS? Arthur blinked, looking genuinely caught off guard. Fun. I read. History, mostly. And I play chess. Keeps the mind sharp. Chess. Right. Celeste forced a warm smile. He was sweet in a clinical sort of way. He was completely harmless. A man who measured his life in quarters and fiscal years. As dessert arrived, a shared tiramisu that Arthur barely touched, Celeste made peace with the fact that this would be a one-and-done date. They would split the check, exchange polite platitudes, and never see each other again. "Let me take care of this," Arthur said when the leather folio arrived. He produced a sleek, heavy, black metal credit card, an odd contrast to his beige aesthetic, and handed it to the waiter without looking at the total. "Thank you, Arthur. That's very generous," Celeste said, reaching for her purse. "It's my pleasure. Shall I walk you to your car, or hail you a cab?" "I'm actually taking the subway. It's just a few blocks away," she replied. "I'll walk you to the station, then. The streets can be unpredictable at this hour." Celeste almost laughed at the earnest concern in his voice. New York was unpredictable, sure, but what was Arthur going to do if they ran into trouble? Audit a mugger? Offer to do a criminal's taxes? Still, it was the gentlemanly thing to do, so she nodded, allowing him to help her into her trench coat. Stepping out of the warm restaurant into the biting chill of the November night, Celeste wrapped her coat tighter around herself. The rain had stopped, leaving the cobblestone streets of Soho slick and reflective under the amber glow of the streetlights. The neighborhood was unusually quiet, the typical weekend crowds having thinned out due to the miserable weather. Arthur walked on the street side of the sidewalk, a classic chivalrous move. He kept his hands buried deep in the pockets of his sensible, charcoal-grey wool overcoat. He remained silent, though Celeste noticed his head was constantly on a slight swivel. "You really don't have to walk me all the way," Celeste offered, breaking the quiet as they turned down Mercer Street, an avenue currently shrouded in deep shadows from the towering cast-iron buildings on either side. "I insist," Arthur said. His voice was lower now, lacking the nervous, slightly nasal pitch he had used inside the restaurant. He abruptly stopped walking. Celeste took 2 more steps before realizing he wasn't beside her. She turned back. "Arthur?" Arthur wasn't looking at her. His gaze was locked down the street. A heavy, matte black SUV had just turned onto their block. Its headlights were off, relying only on the amber street lamps to navigate. It was rolling toward them at a crawl, the engine emitting a low, menacing hum. Before Celeste could ask what was wrong, the SUV accelerated violently, its tires screeching against the wet pavement. It swerved toward the curb, slamming on the brakes perfectly parallel to them. The doors flew open. 5 men piled out in a synchronized rush. They weren't ordinary street thugs. They wore matching dark tactical gear, heavy combat boots, and balaclavas that obscured everything but their eyes. The man in the lead held a heavy steel crowbar. 2 others held suppressed handguns, the elongated barrels catching the streetlights. Celeste's heart stopped. A scream trapped itself in her throat. She was entirely frozen, her mind unable to process the sudden leap from a boring date to a violent ambush. "Duck!" The voice that roared the command didn't belong to Arthur the accountant. It was a vicious, commanding bark that resonated with absolute authority. Instinct drove Celeste to her knees. She hit the wet pavement just as Arthur moved. He didn't cower. He didn't raise his hands in surrender. The mild-mannered CPA in the beige sweater vest vanished, replaced by a terrifying force of kinetic energy. The entire sequence lasted no more than 10 seconds, but to Celeste, watching from the damp ground, Time seemed to fracture into agonizingly slow increments. Second one, the lead attacker swung the steel crowbar aimed directly at Arthur's head. Arthur didn't step back. He stepped in. He ducked cleanly beneath the arc of the weapon, driving his palm upward into the man's chin with a sickening, percussive crack. The man's eyes rolled back instantly, his body going completely limp as he crumpled to the pavement. Second three. Arthur snatched the falling crowbar from the unconscious man's grip before it even hit the ground. He spun on his heel, using the momentum to hurl the heavy steel bar directly into the chest of the second man, who was just raising his suppressed pistol. The impact lifted the gunman off his feet, driving all the air from his lungs with a wheeze as he collapsed backward onto the SUV's hood. Second five, the third man lunged, drawing a serrated tactical knife. Arthur sidestepped the thrust with the fluid grace of a dancer. He caught the man's extended wrist, pivoted sharply, and wrenched the arm over his own shoulder. A loud snap echoed down the alley. The man dropped the knife, crying out in agony. But Arthur silenced him instantly with a devastating elbow strike to the temple. 3 down. Second 7. The final 2 men, realizing their target was far more dangerous than anticipated, hesitated. That hesitation was their downfall. They raised their firearms, but Arthur was already moving. He slid across the slick hood of the SUV, closing the distance instantly. Second 9. He grabbed the barrel of the fourth man's gun, shoving it upward just as a muffled puff sounded, the bullet taking out a street lamp overhead. Arthur twisted the weapon violently out of the man's hands and used the heavy steel butt of the pistol to strike him squarely in the jaw. The man folded like a cheap lawn chair. Second 10. The fifth man panicked, dropping his weapon and turning to run. Arthur didn't let him. He closed the gap in 2 massive strides, grabbed the back of the man's tactical vest, swept his legs out from under him, and slammed him down hard onto the cobblestones. The man hit the ground and didn't move again. Total silence descended on Mercer Street, broken only by the steady idle of the SUV's engine and the sound of Celeste's frantic, shallow breathing. Celeste remained huddled on the ground, her coat soaked with dirty puddle water, her eyes wide with unadulterated terror. She stared at the scene before her. 5 massive armed men were scattered across the pavement, completely incapacitated. Standing in the center of the wreckage was Arthur. His beige V-neck wasn't even wrinkled. His chest rose and fell in slow, controlled rhythms. He reached up, calmly adjusting his thick-rimmed glasses, which had slid slightly down the bridge of his nose. He looked down at the bodies, then over at Celeste, letting out a heavy, tired sigh. "Check, please," Arthur muttered to himself, his voice vibrating with a dark, lethal edge. He walked over to Celeste, extending a hand. "We need to leave. Right now." Celeste couldn't move. She stared at the hand extended toward her. The knuckles were unblemished, the fingernails neatly trimmed. It was the hand of a man who typed on a keyboard for a living. Yet she had just watched those exact hands dismantle a hit squad with ruthless, military precision. "Who? What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling violently. "I'll explain everything, I promise," Arthur said, the urgency in his voice rising. "But if we stay here, more will come. And I cannot guarantee your safety if the second team is better than this one. Take my hand, Celeste." Survival instinct overrode her shock. She grabbed his hand. He hauled her to her feet effortlessly, his grip iron strong. He didn't lead her back the way they came. Instead, he pulled her toward the idling black SUV the assassins had arrived in. "We're stealing their car," Celeste gasped as he practically threw her into the passenger seat. "Borrowing," Arthur corrected, sliding behind the wheel. He threw the heavy vehicle into drive and stomped on the gas. The SUV roared to life, tearing down Mercer Street, leaving the groaning bodies behind in the shadows. Inside the cabin, the tension was suffocating. Celeste clutched her purse to her chest like a shield, her entire body shaking. She looked at the man driving. He drove with one hand draped casually over the steering wheel, his eyes scanning the mirrors with calculated intensity. He reached up, pulled off the thick-rimmed glasses, and tossed them into the center console. He ran a hand through his rigidly styled hair, breaking the product, letting the dark strands fall naturally across his forehead. He unbuttoned his beige sweater vest, shrugging out of it with one hand to reveal a custom-tailored shoulder holster strapped over his pristine white shirt. Nestled in the leather was a massive dark handgun. He wasn't an accountant. The awkwardness, the nervous rambling about the IRS, the terrible posture, it had all been a meticulously crafted disguise. Without the glasses and the slouch, his jawline seemed sharper, his presence overwhelmingly dominant. He radiated danger. "You lied to me," Celeste stated, her voice gaining a fraction of its normal strength, fueled by rising anger. "I lied to everyone," he replied, his voice deep, gravelly, and entirely stripped of the mild-mannered Arthur persona. "My name isn't Arthur. It's Darian, and I don't work for an accounting firm." "No kidding," Celeste yelled, the adrenaline finally boiling over. "You just went full John Wick on 5 guys. Why were they trying to kill us? Why were they trying to kill me?" "They weren't after you, Celeste," Darian said, taking a sharp turn onto Houston Street, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. "They were after me. You were just collateral. Unfortunate timing. I thought I had covered my tracks better. I thought tonight was secure." "Secure? You treated our date like a covert operation?" "It was a covert operation," Darian shot back, his jaw tight. "I haven't sat in a public restaurant in 8 months. I haven't had a normal conversation in a year. When my associate set this up through your friend Jessica, it was supposed to be a blind spot. 3 hours of normalcy in a fake life. Victor wasn't supposed to find me." "Who the hell is Victor?" Darian sighed, merging onto the FDR drive, pushing the heavy SUV to speeds well beyond the legal limit. "Victor Costello. He runs a very specific, very violent enterprise on the East Coast. An enterprise my family used to control before Victor decided to orchestrate a hostile takeover. I've been dismantling his operations from the shadows, piece by piece. Those men back there? They were his cleaners." Celeste felt the world spinning. "Costello. Wait. The Costello family. You're in the Mafia?" "I prefer the term syndicate, but for the sake of brevity, yes." Darian glanced at her, his hazel eyes completely different now, cold, sharp, and laden with regret. "I am deeply sorry, Celeste. I genuinely enjoyed hearing about your architectural designs. But right now, because Victor's men saw you with me, you are a loose end. And Victor Costello does not leave loose ends." "So what?" Celeste's voice cracked. "You're kidnapping me?" "I'm protecting you," Darian corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Until I eliminate Victor, you cannot go home. You cannot call Jessica. You cannot go to work. You can't just uproot my life. I have a dog. I have a presentation on Tuesday for a museum annex." "Celeste," Darian said softly, the harshness fading for just a fraction of a second. "If you go back to your apartment tonight, you will not live to see Tuesday. I dragged you into my war. I take full responsibility for that. But you are going to have to trust me." "Trust you?" She let out a hysterical, breathless laugh. "You wore a sweater vest and talked about tax depreciation for 2 hours. You're a professional liar. A tiny, almost imperceptible smirk tugged at the corner of Darian's mouth. The tax depreciation laws were entirely accurate. I memorized the current IRS code to maintain cover. I am nothing if not thorough. That doesn't make me feel better. It shouldn't, Darian agreed, exiting the highway and plunging the SUV into a labyrinth of industrial side streets in Brooklyn. We're going to a safe house. It has high security, perimeter alarms, and a fully stocked kitchen. Once we're inside, I will make some calls. I need to find out how Victor tracked me to Osteria Marini. Celeste sank back into the leather seat, staring out the window at the passing warehouses. Her normal, tedious life was gone, shattered in the space of 10 seconds in a dark alley. She looked back at the man who was now technically her abductor and her only lifeline. If we survive this, Celeste muttered, wrapping her coat tight against the chill of the SUV's AC, I am never letting Jessica set me up again. Darian let out a low, genuine chuckle that vibrated through the cabin. That, Ms. Sanders, is probably the most sensible decision you've made all night. Tires crunched over broken gravel as the stolen SUV bypassed a dilapidated warehouse in Greenpoint. Darian steered the heavy vehicle toward what looked like an abandoned freight elevator at the rear of the lot. He punched a sequence into a battered keypad mounted on a rusted stanchion. With a heavy mechanical groan, the corrugated metal doors parted, revealing a pristine, brightly lit subterranean garage. Darian killed the engine. The silence that rushed into the cabin was deafening, a stark contrast to the adrenaline-fueled chaos of the past 30 minutes. He unclipped his seatbelt and turned to Celeste, his expression unreadable in the harsh, fluorescent lighting. "We are secure here," Darian said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "The perimeter is lined with motion sensors, and the blast doors are reinforced steel. You can breathe now, Celeste." Celeste's hands were clamped so tightly around her leather Prada tote that her knuckles were entirely white. She nodded numbly, letting him open the passenger door and guide her out. The garage housed a sleek Ducati motorcycle and a matte grey Audi RS6, further shattering the illusion of Arthur the frugal accountant. He led her to a keypad-locked reinforced door, scanning his thumbprint and entering a 12-digit passcode. The door clicked open with the heavy, satisfying sound of a bank vault. If the exterior was a masterclass in urban decay, the interior of the safe house was a testament to extreme, paranoid luxury. It was a sprawling, open-concept loft with polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, and structural steel beams. A massive velvet sectional dominated the center of the room, facing a wall composed entirely of high-resolution monitors. The kitchen area was equipped with a commercial-grade Sub-Zero refrigerator, a gleaming La Marzocco espresso machine, and thick marble countertops. Celeste, functioning on autopilot, let her architectural eye assess the space. "Polycarbonate glass," she murmured, tapping a massive window that looked out into a fake, backlit courtyard. "And you removed the load-bearing columns in favor of an I-beam suspension system. Whoever designed this wasn't just hiding. They were preparing for a siege." Darian paused, shrugging off his shoulder holster and placing it carefully on a stainless steel island. He looked at her, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his features. "You have a sharp eye. Most people just notice the television." "I'm a senior associate at Gensler. I design commercial fortresses for a living," Celeste said, her voice shaking slightly as she set her purse down. She wrapped her arms around herself. "And right now, I would really like a glass of water before I go into systemic shock." "Of course." Darian moved to the kitchen with predatory grace. The clumsy, hesitant Arthur was entirely gone. In his place was a man who moved with terrifying efficiency. He poured her a glass of filtered water and handed it over. Celeste drank it in one long gulp. So, Darian, you're a mobster, and you're hiding from other mobsters. I am the heir to the Moretti family, Darian corrected softly, leaning against the marble counter. A family that, until 10 months ago, managed port logistics, real estate developments, and political lobbying across the eastern seaboard. Victor Costello was my father's underboss. When my father died of a sudden, highly suspicious heart attack, Victor orchestrated a purge. He wiped out my uncles, my cousins, and anyone loyal to our bloodline in a single night. Celeste felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp clothes clinging to her skin. And you survived. Barely, Darian admitted, his hazel eyes darkening. I've been operating as a ghost ever since, freezing his offshore accounts, intercepting his shipments, and bleeding his empire dry. I was getting close to crippling him completely. That's why I needed the disguise. Arthur was a ghost identity, complete with a forged CPA license, a lease in Astoria, and a spotless credit history. It allowed me to move through the city unnoticed. Until tonight. Celeste stepped closer to the island, staring at the heavy black handgun resting next to the espresso machine. How did Victor find you? That is what I intend to find out. Darian moved to the bank of monitors and tapped a keyboard. The screens flared to life, displaying strings of code, live traffic feeds, and a secure server interface. He plugged a physical YubiKey into a port, authenticating his access. I ran this entire date through an encrypted signal protocol, Darian muttered, his fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with practiced speed. My associate reached out to your friend Jessica under the guise of a mutual networking connection. There were no digital breadcrumbs, no geotags. Celeste sat on one of the leather bar stools, her mind racing. Jessica is just a junior buyer for Saks Fifth Avenue. She wouldn't know a mafia hitman if he offered her a discount on Chanel. She set me up because her new boyfriend told her he had a great guy for me. Darian's fingers stopped typing abruptly. The sudden silence in the loft was heavy, thick with impending realization. He turned slowly in his chair to face her. Jessica's new boyfriend, Darian repeated, his tone lethally calm. What is his name? Leo, Celeste said, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Leo Rossi. She met him about 2 months ago. He's in import and export, I think. He drives a very flashy Maserati and wears too much cologne. Darian swore softly in Italian. He turned back to the monitors, pulling up a secure database. He typed fiercely, cross-referencing names. A moment later, a DMV photo of a slick-looking man with a tailored suit and a smug smile appeared on the center screen. Is this Leo? Darian asked. Celeste squinted at the screen and nodded. Yes, that's him. Leo Rossi is a mid-level earner for the Costello family, Darian said, dragging a hand down his face. He manages customs bribes at the Red Hook terminal. Or, why would a Costello earner set me up on a blind date with a rival mafia boss? Celeste asked, her voice pitching higher in disbelief. That doesn't make any sense. They couldn't have known Arthur was actually you, right? Unless they weren't targeting you at all. Darian's posture went rigidly still. He looked at Celeste, his eyes narrowing as the puzzle pieces slammed together in a horrifying configuration. Celeste, what exactly does your firm do? Gensler? We're an architecture and design firm. We do everything. Airports, corporate headquarters, luxury high-rises. You mentioned a presentation on Tuesday, Darian pressed, standing up and walking toward her. The intensity radiating from him was palpable. You said you were designing a museum annex. Yes, the Hudson Yards Contemporary. It's a massive, privately funded gallery space and luxury penthouse complex. We've been rushing the blueprints for weeks because the holding company wants to break ground by spring. Who is the holding company? Apex Equities, Celeste replied automatically. Darian didn't say a word. He walked back to the computer, typed Apex Equities into his terminal, and hit enter. A sprawling web of corporate structures, LLCs, and offshore bank accounts cascaded across the screens. At the very top of the financial pyramid, sitting above the shell corporations and the dummy boards of directors, was a single name highlighted in red. Victor Costello. Celeste stared at the name on the screen, the glowing red letters burning themselves into her retinas. The room felt entirely unmoored, as if the concrete floor was tilting beneath her feet. "My firm," she started, her breath catching in her throat. "My firm is designing a building for a mob boss." "Apex Equities is Victor's crown jewel," Darian explained, his voice taking on a grim, clinical detachment. "It's not just a gallery, Celeste. Real estate is the cleanest, most efficient way to launder illicit cash. $1 billion development in Hudson Yards? It would allow him to wash decades of syndicate money, legitimizing his empire permanently. Once that concrete is poured, he's untouchable by the feds." "But why would they target me?" Celeste protested, gesturing wildly. "I'm just a designer. I draw floor plans and specify lighting fixtures. I don't know anything about money laundering." "Because you are too good at your job," Darian deduced, his eyes scanning her with newfound respect. "Did you notice anything unusual about the project requirements? Structural anomalies? Spaces that didn't make sense?" Celeste froze. Her mind raced back to the late nights at the office, the endless revisions, the arguments she had with her project manager. "The sub-basement," Celeste whispered, her eyes widening. "The client insisted on a 4-story subterranean level. They claimed it was for climate-controlled art storage, but the HVAC specifications they demanded were entirely wrong for preserving canvas or sculpture. The ventilation system was industrial, the kind you use to extract chemical fumes, and the security protocols for the freight elevators, they required independent off-grid power supplies and biometric locks that bypass the building's main security network. It's a drug processing and distribution hub," Darian stated, crossing his arms, "hidden beneath $1 billion cultural landmark in the heart of Manhattan. Brilliant." "I flagged it," Celeste said, the panic now morphing into a cold, sharp clarity. "Last Thursday, I submitted a formal compliance report to the city's zoning board, noting that the structural and mechanical requests violated commercial building codes. I told my boss I wouldn't stamp the blueprints until an independent auditor reviewed the sub-basement specs." Darian looked at her, a slow, predatory smile touching his lips. It was a terrifying expression, beautiful and completely devoid of mercy. "You blew the whistle on Victor Costello's $1 billion golden goose. You didn't just delay his project, Celeste. You threatened his entire exit strategy." "So, Leo didn't set this date up to trap you," she realized, the horrifying truth settling over her. "No," Darian agreed. "My associate, using a fake name, reached out to Jessica to set up a blind date for Arthur. Leo, monitoring Jessica's life, saw an opportunity. He knew Victor had ordered a hit on the pesky architect who was holding up the Hudson Yards project. Leo steered you to Osteria Morini tonight, knowing his hit squad would be waiting outside. I wasn't the target, Celeste. You were." Celeste slumped onto the bar stool, covering her face with her hands. The boring date, the awkward conversations about taxes, the beige sweater. It had all been a collision of two entirely separate, deadly conspiracies. They thought Arthur was just collateral damage, Darian continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. They expected a soft, civilian casualty. Instead, they walked into a buzzsaw. "Oh my God," Celeste mumbled through her fingers. "I have to call the police, the FBI, someone." "You can't," Darian said, stepping closer, gently but firmly pulling her hands away from her face. His calloused thumbs brushed against her knuckles. "Victor owns half the precinct in Midtown. If you go to the authorities, you will disappear before you ever reach a federal prosecutor. The only reason you are alive right now is because Victor's men are lying unconscious in an alley, and Victor doesn't yet know that Arthur the accountant is actually Darian Moretti." "Then what do we do?" Celeste asked, looking up into his piercing hazel eyes. She realized with a strange jolt that she wasn't terrified of him anymore. He was a monster, yes, but he was a monster, standing between her and a much worse fate. "Victor thinks his hit squad is taking care of a civilian architect tonight," Darian said, turning back to the bank of monitors. He began rapidly typing, pulling up schematics and security feeds. He won't expect any resistance. He certainly won't expect a counterattack. Tomorrow night, Victor is hosting a private gala at the Pierre Hotel to celebrate the approaching groundbreaking of his Hudson Yards project. Darian turned back to her, and for the first time all evening, the ghost of Arthur completely vanished, replaced by the reigning air of a violent, unforgiving empire. "You have the master blueprints to his entire operation in your head, Celeste. I have the resources and the firepower to burn his empire to ash. We are going to that gala, and we are going to tear Victor Costello's world apart." Celeste stared at the guns on the counter, then at the glowing screens displaying her own architectural designs. A spark of defiance, foreign and fierce, ignited in her chest. They wanted to kill her over a ventilation system. "Fine," Celeste said, her voice steadying. She squared her shoulders, mirroring his commanding posture. "But I'm not wearing a slip dress to a war. If we're crashing a gala at the Pierre, I'm going to need a better outfit." "Wah!" Darian Moretti laughed, a dark, echoing sound that filled the fortified bunker. "Miss Sanders, I think we are going to make a devastating team." Sunlight pierced the faux glass skylight of the underground bunker, casting a pale, artificial dawn over the concrete floor. Celeste awoke on the massive velvet sectional, a cashmere throw draped over her. She blinked away the haze of exhaustion, her mind instantly recalling the chaotic violence of the previous night. Darian was already awake, standing near the kitchen island, meticulously assembling a sleek, compact firearm. He wore dark tactical trousers and a fitted black Henley, looking every inch the syndicate heir he had confessed to being. "Coffee is in the carafe," Darian said, without looking up, locking a magazine into place with a sharp metallic click. "We have a lot of ground to cover before tonight." Celeste pushed herself up, her muscles aching from the sudden dive onto the cobblestones. She walked to the counter, pouring a dark, steaming cup of espresso. "Did you sleep at all?" "Sleep is a luxury for men who aren't being hunted," Darian replied smoothly. He set the weapon aside and picked up a tablet. "I intercepted Victor's security detail manifest for the gala. He rented out the entire grand ballroom at the Pierre Hotel, along with the penthouse suite. He's utilizing the penthouse as a temporary command center to court international investors for the Hudson Yards project. He has 30 armed men patrolling the event." 30? Celeste choked on her coffee. "And it's just the two of us?" "Numbers are irrelevant when you have the element of surprise," Darian stated, pulling up a digital schematic of the hotel. "Victor thinks you are dead, and he thinks I am still a ghost hiding in Europe. Tonight, we infiltrate the penthouse, access his private encrypted server, and download the offshore routing numbers he plans to use for the Hudson Yards laundering scheme. Once I have those accounts, I can drain his liquid assets globally with a single keystroke. Without money, his mercenaries will abandon him by morning. Celeste leaned over the tablet, her architectural instincts kicking in. She traced the glowing blue lines of the Pierre's layout. Getting into the ballroom is one thing, but that penthouse is a fortress. Private elevator, dedicated security lobby, keyed access. Exactly, Darian agreed, frowning at the screen. My team can spoof the elevator keycard, but the secondary security checkpoint in the penthouse lobby is manned by 4 of Victor's top enforcers. Bypassing them quietly will be unnecessary, Celeste interrupted, her eyes darting across the structural diagrams. She tapped a section of the blueprint located 2 floors directly beneath the penthouse. You're looking at it like a soldier. Look at it like a builder. This hotel was renovated extensively 12 years ago. They upgraded the central HVAC systems, but they didn't want to compromise the historical crown molding in the main corridors. So, they routed the primary ventilation shafts through the old, decommissioned dumbwaiter shafts from the 1930s. Darian raised an eyebrow, leaning closer. Meaning? Meaning, if we can access the maintenance utility closet on the 41st floor, there is a vertical service shaft wide enough for a person to climb. It bypasses the penthouse lobby entirely and opens up directly behind the master suite's fireplace. I know this because Gensler consulted on the retrofitting. It's a massive security blind spot. Darian stared at her, genuine awe softening the hard lines of his face. Arthur the accountant would be terrified of you. Darian Moretti, however, is incredibly impressed. Save the compliments until we survive the night, Celeste muttered, though a flush of pride warmed her cheeks. How are we even getting into the gala? I highly doubt we are on the guest list. I had my associates procure invitations belonging to a reclusive tech billionaire and his +1 who conveniently missed their flight from Zurich this morning, Darion explained, walking toward a row of steel lockers against the far wall. He punched in a code, and the doors swung open, revealing an arsenal of custom suits and weaponry. Tonight, I am Thomas Whitmore, and you are my esteemed colleague, Ms. Harper. I had this delivered an hour ago. I guessed your size based on your slip dress. Celeste unzipped the heavy garment bag he handed her, her breath catching. Inside hung a breathtaking emerald green evening gown. It featured a plunging neckline, a daring thigh-high slit, and was crafted from a heavy, liquid silk that shimmered under the bunker's harsh lights. It's stunning, she breathed. It's also functional, Darian pointed out. The fabric is interwoven with a flexible ballistic weave. It won't stop a direct shot from a high-caliber rifle, but it will deflect a grazing round or a knife strike. I also included a customized thigh holster. You won't be carrying a firearm, but it houses a localized EMP generator to disable Victor's security cameras when we hit the 41st floor. Celeste held the dress up, feeling its surprising weight. Yesterday, she was arguing about drywall specifications. Today, she was holding tactical haute couture. Hours melted away in a blur of preparation. Darian drilled her on the layout, the timing, and their cover story. When evening finally descended on the city, they were ready. Stepping out of the bunker's washroom, Celeste felt like a stranger in her own skin. The emerald gown fit perfectly, molding to her curves and cascading to the floor in elegant folds. She had pulled her auburn hair into a severe, sleek twist, pinning it securely at the nape of her neck. A layer of dark, smoky eyeshadow gave her gaze a fierce, uncompromising edge. Darian was waiting by the Audi. He had traded his tactical gear for a bespoke, midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. His dark hair was slicked back, a stark contrast to the rigid, dorky part Arthur had worn. He exuded an aura of absolute power and quiet menace. He looked up as she approached, his breath hitching slightly. For a long moment, the ruthless syndicate boss disappeared, replaced by a man genuinely captivated. "You look dangerous, Celeste." "That's the objective, isn't it?" she replied, her voice steady, masking the wild fluttering in her chest. "Indeed." He offered his arm. "Shall we go dismantle an empire?" Rain had begun to fall again, slicking the streets of Manhattan and reflecting the dazzling lights of Fifth Avenue. The matte grey Audi pulled smoothly into the valet line at the Pierre Hotel. Paparazzi and curious onlookers clustered around the red carpet, leading up to the grand entrance, hoping to catch a glimpse of the socialites, politicians, and silent investors arriving for Victor Costello's fraudulent celebration. Darian handed the keys to the valet with a crisp $100 bill. He rounded the car, offering his hand to Celeste. She took it, stepping out of the low vehicle. The thigh-high slit of her gown offered maximum mobility, hiding the sleek EMP device strapped to her left leg. "Remember," Darian murmured, his lips barely moving as they walked up the steps, his hand resting securely on the small of her back. "You belong here. You are wealthy, bored, and untouchable. If anyone speaks to you, dismiss them. Arrogance is the best armor." "Got it," Celeste whispered, lifting her chin and fixing a cold, detached expression onto her face. They approached the security checkpoint at the ballroom doors. Two massive men in tailored suits, enforcers attempting to look like legitimate security, scanned the crowd. Darian presented his phone, displaying the forged QR codes. The scanner beeped a pleasant green. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Harper." "Welcome," the guard grunted, though his eyes lingered suspiciously on Darian's broad frame. "Enjoy the evening." They stepped into the grand ballroom, and Celeste had to fight the urge to gasp. The space was a masterpiece of classic opulence, featuring massive crystal chandeliers, gilded frescoes, and towering floral arrangements of white orchids. A string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the hum of wealthy patrons clinking champagne flutes. "Victor doesn't do things by halves," Darian noted, snagging 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and handing one to Celeste. "He's trying to buy respectability. Unfortunately for him, respectability is expensive." "Where is he?" Celeste asked, keeping her voice low, her eyes scanning the room. "Not here yet. He typically makes a grand entrance just before the main speeches, which gives us roughly 45 minutes to access the penthouse and drain his accounts." Darian guided her smoothly through the crowd, avoiding eye contact with the various captains and capos disguised as businessmen. They reached the rear of the ballroom, near a set of heavy mahogany doors marked for staff only. Darian glanced around. The nearest guard was distracted by a drunken socialite dropping her clutch. "Now," Darian whispered. They slipped through the doors, instantly trading the glittering noise of the gala for the stark, fluorescent quiet of the hotel's service corridors. Darian moved with terrifying speed, leading her past industrial kitchens and laundry chutes until they reached the service elevators. He pulled a small digital cloner from his pocket, pressing it against the card reader. Seconds later, the doors slid open. 41st floor, Darian announced, pressing the button. The ride up was agonizingly tense. Celeste watched the digital floor indicator climb, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was an architect, not a spy. What was she doing here? She glanced at Darian. He stood perfectly still, his eyes focused, his breathing controlled. His absolute calm anchored her. The elevator chimed, depositing them into a dimly lit maintenance hallway. Celeste took the lead, her spatial memory guiding them flawlessly. "Take a left here," she directed, pointing down a narrow corridor lined with exposed pipes and electrical panels. The utility closet should be at the very end. They reached a heavy metal door. Darian tested the handle. Locked. He didn't hesitate, drawing a lockpick set from his tuxedo jacket. He had it open in under 5 seconds. Inside, the closet smelled of ozone and dust. Just as Celeste had promised, behind a massive industrial boiler, a heavy steel grate covered a defunct dumbwaiter shaft. "Brilliant," Darian murmured. He grabbed the edges of the grate, his muscles straining against the tailored fabric of his suit. With a harsh grating sound, he pulled the heavy cover free, setting it silently on the concrete floor. He looked into the dark, vertical shaft. A sturdy metal ladder ran straight up into the gloom. "Ladies first. I'll be right beneath you. If you slip, I will catch you." Celeste hiked up the heavy silk of her emerald gown, tying the excess fabric into a knot at her hip to free her legs. She reached in, grasping the cold iron rungs, and began to climb. It was dark, claustrophobic work, the air growing warmer and staler the higher they went. "Stop!" Darian hissed from below. Celeste froze. They were level with a heavy ventilation grate. Light spilled through the slats, illuminating her face. "This is it," she whispered down to him. "The penthouse master suite." Darian climbed up beside her, pressing shoulder to shoulder in the cramped space. He peered through the grate. The room beyond was empty, a massive, lavishly decorated bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "No guards inside," Darian confirmed. "Deploy the EMP, Celeste." She reached down to the holster strapped to her thigh, her fingers finding the small, cylindrical device. She twisted the cap and pressed the activation button. A faint, high-pitched whine filled the shaft, followed immediately by the sound of small electrical pops from the room beyond. The red security lights on the room's cameras went instantly dark. "Cameras are blind," Darian said. He pushed against the grate. It was bolted from the outside. He cursed silently, then braced his boots against the opposite wall of the shaft. He drove his palm forward with explosive force. The bolts groaned, snapping under the immense pressure, and the grate clattered onto the thick Persian rug inside the suite. Darian vaulted out of the shaft, turning instantly to help Celeste down. They stood in the silent, darkened bedroom. The only sound was the distant rumble of the city below. "The server will be in his office," Darian instructed, drawing his handgun from his shoulder holster, the silencer already attached. "Stay behind me." They crept out of the bedroom and into a sprawling, modern living area. The door to the office was slightly ajar. A faint blue glow emanated from within. Darian moved like a shadow, slipping through the doorway. Celeste followed, holding her breath. The office was sleek and minimalist. In the center sat a massive glass desk, and resting on it was a heavy, state-of-the-art server rack wired directly into a high-powered terminal. "He hardwired it," Darian noted, stepping up to the keyboard. "Smart. It prevents remote hacking. But if you have physical access..." He pulled a specialized flash drive from his pocket, inserting it into the terminal. Lines of code began racing across the screen. "How long?" Celeste asked, nervously watching the office door. 3 minutes, Darian replied, his fingers flying across the keys. "I'm bypassing the firewalls and initiating a mass transfer to a series of blind trust accounts. Once this hits 100%, Victor Costello is bankrupt." 1 minute passed. The progress bar hit 35%. 2 minutes passed. 68%. "Almost there," Darian muttered, his eyes locked on the screen. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the penthouse lobby, located just past the living room, slammed open. A booming, furious voice echoed down the hallway. "What do you mean the cameras are down in the master suite? Get maintenance up here immediately." Celeste's heart stopped. She recognized that arrogant, raspy voice from news clips. It was Victor Costello, and he wasn't alone. Heavy, hurried footsteps were charging directly toward the office. Darian didn't look away from the screen. Celeste, get against the wall. Now! Footsteps thundered across the hardwood floor of the living room, growing louder by the second. Panic seized Celeste, freezing her in place for a fraction of a second before her survival instinct kicked in. She threw herself against the sleek mahogany wall, pressing her back flat against the cool surface, entirely concealed by the shadows near the doorway. Darian did not flinch. He kept one hand resting on the keyboard, his eyes locked onto the monitor as the progress bar inched forward. 88%. 89%. In his right hand, his suppressed pistol was raised, steady as carved stone, aimed squarely at the center of the office doorway. Check the master suite. If someone tripped the breakers, I want them fired immediately. Victor Costello's raspy voice barked, now just feet away. A massive enforcer in a tailored charcoal suit stepped into the office, his weapon already drawn, sweeping the room. He never even had the chance to shout a warning. Pfft. Darian's weapon cycled with a muffled cough. The enforcer's eyes rolled backward, dropping his gun before collapsing heavily onto the expensive Persian rug. What was that? Victor yelled from the hall. Another guard rushed into the doorway, immediately spotting the fallen man. Pfft. Puffed. Two precise, suppressed shots echoed in the confined space. The second guard folded, crashing into a glass side table that shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. Darian, Celeste gasped, pointing at the screen. 96%. 97%. Silence abruptly fell over the hallway. Victor was a seasoned predator. He knew a fatal trap when he heard one. He didn't rush in blindly. Instead, he ducked behind the thick oak doorframe of the office, his breathing heavy and ragged. "Whoever is in there," Victor called out, his tone attempting to mask the rising panic. "You have exactly 10 seconds before I call my entire security detail up here. You are trapped. Walk out now, and I might make it quick." Darian finally pulled his eyes away from the screen. He stepped around the glass desk, his posture radiating lethal dominance. "I don't think you will be making anything quick, Victor," Darian replied, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "Not anymore." A sharp gasp echoed from the hallway. "Moretti? That's impossible. You're dead. You're supposed to be rotting in a ditch in Palermo." "I prefer Manhattan," Darian said smoothly. The progress bar on the screen hit 100%. The system chimed softly. "Transfer complete." The automated prompt flashed in bright green letters. Darian reached over, yanking the encrypted flash drive from the terminal port and sliding it into his tuxedo pocket. "What did you do?" Victor snarled, abandoning his cover and stepping into the doorway. He was a stocky, older man, his face flushed with rage, holding a compact revolver. He aimed it directly at Darian's chest. "What did you do to my server, you arrogant little punk?" "I audited you," Darian stated calmly, refusing to raise his own weapon. He stood completely exposed, yet he controlled the entire room. Every offshore account, every shell corporation, the Cayman funds, the Zurich trusts, the dummy LLCs backing Apex equities. They are all empty, Victor. I drained every single cent. Victor's face went entirely pale. The revolver in his hand trembled. "You're lying. That system is impenetrable." "It was," Darian agreed, "until you decided to assassinate the architect who flagged your little construction anomaly. You brought this on yourself, Victor. You thought you were clearing a roadblock. Instead, you handed me the exact blueprints I needed to dismantle your empire." Celeste watched from the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. She saw Victor's finger tightening on the trigger, driven by sheer, desperate madness. "I'll just kill you and take the drive back," Victor roared. He didn't get the chance. Celeste didn't think. She reacted. She grabbed a heavy bronze bookend from the shelf beside her and hurled it with all her strength. The heavy metal object sailed through the air, catching Victor squarely on the side of his wrist. A sickening crack echoed in the room. Victor screamed, dropping the revolver as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle. Darian moved instantly, crossing the room in 2 massive strides. He grabbed Victor by the lapels of his custom suit, slamming the older man against the mahogany wall with bone-jarring force. He pressed the barrel of his suppressed pistol directly under Victor's chin. "You took my family," Darian whispered, his voice vibrating with absolute, unfiltered wrath. "You stole my legacy. I could end you right now, Victor. It would be incredibly satisfying." Victor whimpered, his previous arrogance entirely evaporated, replaced by raw terror. "But killing you is too easy," Darian continued, his eyes cold and unyielding. "I sent those files to the FBI, the SEC, and the IRS 5 minutes ago. By tomorrow morning, you won't just be broke. You will be the most hunted man in America. Your own capos will turn on you the second they realize the payroll is gone. I want you to spend the rest of your short, miserable life looking over your shoulder, knowing I was the one who broke you." Darian struck Victor sharply across the temple with the heavy steel grip of his pistol. The older man slumped to the floor, completely unconscious. The Empire was dead. Darian let out a long, shuddering breath, the tension finally leaving his broad shoulders. He turned to look at Celeste, who was staring at her own hands, clearly in shock over having just assaulted a mafia boss. "A bronze bookend?" Darian asked, a small, genuine smile breaking through his severe expression. "It was solid brass, actually," Celeste corrected, her voice trembling slightly. "It felt structurally sound." "It was perfect," Darian said softly, closing the distance between them. "We need to go. The authorities will be here in less than 10 minutes. Sirens wailed in the distance, a chaotic symphony that shattered the midnight quiet of Manhattan. Celeste and Darian had bypassed the elevators entirely, descending the maintenance shafts and utilizing a service exit that dumped them into a damp alley 3 blocks away from the Pierre Hotel. They stood on the roof of a parking garage, watching the flashing red and blue lights swarm the luxury hotel. SWAT vans blocked the intersections, and federal agents were already storming the grand entrance. The gala had turned into the largest organized crime bust in a decade. The chilly autumn wind whipped across the rooftop, pulling at the heavy silk of Celeste's emerald gown. She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Darian noticed immediately. He shrugged off his midnight blue tuxedo jacket and draped it over her bare shoulders. The fabric was warm, carrying the faint, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and expensive fabric softener. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the lapels tighter. "It is the least I can do, considering I ruined your Friday night," Darian replied, leaning against the concrete parapet, his eyes fixed on the chaos below. "The police will find Victor unconscious in his office, surrounded by enough digital evidence to lock him away for a dozen lifetimes. The Hudson Yards project will be seized by the city. Your firm will be cleared of any wrongdoing." "And what about you?" Celeste asked, turning to face him. The harsh streetlights cast sharp shadows across his jawline, highlighting the dangerous, captivating angles of his face. "Are you going back to being Arthur the accountant?" Darian let out a low, rough chuckle. He reached up, running a hand through his dark hair, entirely ruining the slicked-back style. "Arthur has officially retired. He served his purpose. With Victor gone, the Moretti syndicate is effectively dissolved. I drained the accounts, but I didn't keep the money. It's currently being distributed to a network of charities and anonymous trusts. Celeste stared at him, stunned. You gave it all away? Billions of dollars? It was dirty money, Celeste, built on suffering and extortion. I wanted to destroy Victor, not replace him. I have enough legitimate investments to live comfortably. I don't need an empire. He turned his piercing hazel eyes toward her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. The problem is, I don't exactly have a blueprint for what comes next. Well, Celeste started, a bold, reckless courage flaring in her chest. She stepped closer to him, closing the space until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Speaking as an architect, sometimes the best thing you can do is tear a flawed structure down to the studs and build something entirely new. Darian looked down at her, his expression softening, intense, and completely focused on her face. And what kind of foundation would you recommend? Something solid, Celeste whispered, looking up into his eyes. Something that doesn't involve beige sweater vests, fake tax discussions, or heavily armed assassins. I think I can manage that, Darian murmured. He reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of auburn hair behind her ear. His calloused fingers lingered against her jaw, warm and surprisingly tender for a man capable of such swift violence. Celeste didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his touch, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now. When he leaned in to kiss her, it was nothing like the awkward, polite tension she had expected from their blind date. It was fierce, passionate, and entirely overwhelming, carrying the adrenaline of the night and the promise of a completely unpredictable future. Celeste kissed him back, tangling her fingers into his dark hair, anchoring herself to the man who had turned her mundane world upside down. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and smiling under the neon glow of the city sky, Darian kept his arms wrapped securely around her waist. So, Darian whispered, resting his forehead against hers. I don't suppose you are free for a second date? Perhaps somewhere with slightly less gunfire. Celeste laughed, the sound bright and clear, echoing across the quiet rooftop. The boring life she had craved just 24 hours ago felt like a distant, faded memory. She didn't want sensible. She didn't want predictable. Only if you promise to let me pick the restaurant, Celeste replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. And absolutely no discussions about the IRS. Darian smiled, a genuine, dazzling expression that completely erased the lethal mafia air and left only the man standing before her. You have a deal, Miss Sanders. Hand in hand, they walked away from the edge of the rooftop, leaving the crumbling ruins of a fallen empire behind them, stepping out of the shadows and into the bright, untamed possibilities of the city lights. If you loved this wild ride from a boring blind date to a high-stakes mafia takedown, make sure to hit that like button. We pour our hearts into crafting these intense, twist-filled dramatic stories, and your support means everything to us. Want to see more badass heroines and dangerous double-life heroes? Share this video with your friends who love a good romance mixed with heavy action. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming original audio dramas. Drop a comment below. Would you have survived a date with Darian Moretti?